Ultimate Piano Course by Joseph N. Whether you're simply curious about the instrument or you're driven to learn, this course is designed to allow anyone to flourish at the piano. Now, before we begin, there are two things to note. First is that these videos are based around the Ultimate Piano Course book, so if you don't have a copy of the book, it's imperative that you get one. Links are in the description for that. Second, you'll need an 88-key acoustic or digital piano to practice on. And again, if you don't know of any sources for that, links will be in the description for those as well. Now, assuming we have both of those things ready, let's get started. To begin, let's take a look at the keyboard itself. In total, there are 88 keys, comprised of white keys, separated by black keys in alternating groups of 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, and so on. Now we're going to start by naming the white keys and using the black keys to help us find them. The white keys all have a name for themselves, something we call the musical alphabet. And thankfully, the musical alphabet is the same as the English alphabet, just using the first 7 letters A through G. So as you may have guessed, the very first letter is A. Then we're going to follow it by B, C, D, E, F, and G. Now, we repeat back to A. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we'll repeat again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way up the piano. Now, the first note we're going to begin with is C. To locate C, start on a group of 2 black keys and move to the white key to the left. Now, the note that I'm holding has a name for itself. It's called middle C. And middle C is a very important note because it serves as a divider between the treble clef and the bass clef, or otherwise, your right hand notes and your left hand notes. Now that we know what middle C looks like on the piano, we need to know what it looks like written on the music itself. So for that, let's talk about musical notation. All musical notes are written on a staff, which is 5 lines with 4 spaces between them. For right hand, we use a treble clef, and for left hand notes, we're going to use a bass clef. If we want to see both hands written together, the treble clef will be written above the bass clef, and both of them will be connected by a bracket, sometimes called a brace. By placing notes at differing heights on the grand staff, we'll in turn know which notes to play on the piano. So by knowing every note on the grand staff, we'll be able to read and play every note written on the piano itself. To do this, we're going to memorize our 7 markers for musical success, beginning with our old friend, middle C. As you can see from the diagram, middle C has its own extra line in the middle of the grand staff between the treble and the bass clef. Now, because there is a larger space between the treble and the bass clef, it's actually going to look something more like this. Here you can more clearly identify middle C written in both the treble and the bass clef. In the treble clef, middle C is below the treble clef on its own extra line, whereas in the bass clef, the middle C rises above the bass clef, again on its own extra line. Keep in mind, these are the exact same note on the piano, just written differently. As I previously mentioned, middle C serves as a divider between the treble and bass clef. So a good allegory for this is that middle C is at C level, with all notes above middle C being above C level, and all notes below middle C being below C level. Middle C was our first marker for musical success. Our second marker for musical success is 2 C's above middle C, or our second C above C level. In order to reach this on the staff, we have to have 2 extra lines written above the treble clef. And to reach it on the piano, we'll start by going to middle C, beginning by going to our group of 2 black keys and moving to the white key to the left. So that's middle C. Now we'll go up 1 C, and we'll go up to our second C above C level. Heading in the opposite direction, our next musical marker is 2 C's below C level. To reach this on the staff, we go 2 lines below the bass clef. And to reach this on the piano, we'll again start on middle C, and we'll head 1 C down, and 2 C's below C level. The remainder of our musical markers are going to use something we haven't considered yet, and that is the actual design of the treble and bass clefs themselves. We're going to begin by looking at the design of the treble clef to find our next 2 musical markers. To find these musical markers, we're going to illustrate a story using the design of the treble clef, because storytelling is a very powerful way to help us remember things more easily. We're going to call the treble clef the treble maker, and we're going to call middle C our captain. The treble clef wants to capture the captain out at sea level, the captain being middle C at sea level. Unfortunately, the captain is surrounded by two powerful generals, both the letters G. And in order for the treble clef, the treble maker, to capture the captain, he has to reach these two G's first. So take a look at the design of the treble clef itself. It first swirls around and captures our first general on G, loops up, captures the second general, another G, before the tail of the treble clef finally meets and captures the captain on middle C. So again, it swirls around our first general, the second line, our first G. It comes up, swirls around the second general, sitting above the treble clef, that's our second G, and then comes down to meet the captain on middle C at sea level. To find these notes on the piano, we'll begin with middle C, our captain. The first general is located on the first G above sea level. So we'll count from C, D, E, F to G. Our second general is going to be 2 G's above sea level. So now we just take this G and we'll go to the next G. So we have middle C, our first G, and our second G, all able to be found using the design of the treble clef. To find our final two musical markers, we're going to utilize the design of the bass clef. The bass clef is sometimes called the F clef because it resembles the letter F, much more strongly in the past, but even still to this day. The way it resembles F now is through the two dots. Between those two dots, we have a line, and the note that is on that line is going to be the letter F, which is our 6th musical marker. So remember, we can find it just by looking straight between those dots right on the line. For our final musical marker, we're going to take the bass clef itself and turn it sideways. And if you notice, it makes sort of a frowning face. Well, we can use that. So the curve of the frown, at the very, very bottom of our curve, it points to the bottom space of the bass clef. And on the bottom space of the bass clef, we'll have the letter A. So A will be our final musical marker. Again, between the two dots of the bass clef, we have a line, and on that line is the letter F. If we turn the bass clef sideways and look at the bottom of the frown, follow that frown to the very bottom, and you're going to land on the very bottom space of the bass clef, and that will be A. To find these notes on the piano, we'll once again begin with middle C. The F is the first F below sea level, so we'll just have to count from C down to F. Remember, we have to count backwards. So in this case, C, B, A, repeat back to G, and then we have F. So this F will be the one between the dots, our 6th musical marker. The A happens to be the second A below sea level. So we can go from C, down 1 C, and then we'll count backwards to A. B, A. So there you have it. Those are the 7 markers for musical success. So from the beginning we had middle C, which was either below the treble clef on its own line, or above the bass clef on its own line. Next, we went 2 C's above sea level, which also happens to be 2 lines above the treble clef. Then we went 2 C's below sea level, which was again 2 lines below the bass clef. We used the treble clef, which swirls around our G second line, and it also swirls above the G, sitting above the treble clef itself. And then we used the bass clef design. Between the 2 dots was F, and then at the very bottom of the curve of the bass clef, it pointed to the bottom space, which was the letter A. Keep in mind all these tools we use, storytelling and mnemonics, because we're going to use those again in a little bit when we talk about more of the notes. As you may have noticed, we've only talked about the white keys so far, so now it's time to talk about the black keys. The black keys don't actually have letter names all to themselves like the white keys do, but are instead a modification of the white key, something we call an accidental. Accidentals come in 3 forms: sharps, flats, and naturals, but we're only going to deal with sharps and flats for right now. So let's start with the sharp. A sharp is when we move from one key to the very next key to the right, regardless of whether it's a white key or a black key. On the other hand, a flat is when we move from one key to the very next key to the left. Again, regardless of whether it's a white key or a black key. The sharp symbol looks sort of like a hashtag or a pound sign or a number sign. I've had many students call them tic-tac-toe signs. On the other hand, a flat looks like an italicized letter B. Moving to the piano now, I'm going to start with the letter D. If I wanted to make this a D sharp, I would move one key to the very right, so it would end up on this black key. This would be our D sharp. To make this a D flat, we're going to move one key to the very left, so I would end up on this black key. Now, let's put up a different scenario. Let's say I'm starting on F. For F sharp, it's once again, I would go right to the black key, because that's the very next key to the right. However, if I wanted to go to the very next key to the left, I would actually end up on this white key, which is also the letter E. So there are instances where you might actually have an F flat be just a new letter altogether, E. They're the same thing. We would still label it, though, F flat. Let's refer back to that diagram real quick. Notice that when a note is written to be played sharp or flat, the sharp or flat is written before the note that it is applied to. But when we write out the letters with the sharps and flat, we actually write the letter first and then the sharp and flat symbol. So why is it opposite? Well, when we go to say C sharp, for example, you'd write it the same way, C and then the sharp symbol. But it's much more advantageous for us to actually see the sharp or flat symbol before the note when it's written on the music. We want to take in as much information as possible, so seeing that in advance is going to let us know that we're going to be changing that note, maybe from a white key to a black key, or to a different white key altogether. So seeing that modifier before the actual note is going to help us read much faster. Now that we've got the general idea of the sharps and the flats, let's go back to those white keys. Remember, we used mnemonics and storytelling to help us find the 7 markers for musical success. Well, now we're going to use them again to help us fill in many more of the gaps that we've been missing on the grand staff itself. Take a look at this diagram. Here you can see all of the mnemonics we're going to be using to fill in all of our missing notes on the grand staff. Beginning with the treble clef lines, we have every good boy deserves fudge, which spells E, G, B, D, and F. For the treble clef spaces, they spell face, F-A-C-E. For the bass clef lines, think green birds don't fly away, or G-B-D-F-A. And lastly, for the bass clef spaces, all cows eat grass, or A-C-E-G. You'll also notice above the treble clef and below the bass clef, we have A, C, and E on our supplementary lines. And likewise, in the middle of the grand staff, we can see our middle C line with the notes D and B above and below them. To use these mnemonics to their greatest effect, you'll have to be able to identify them on the staff wherever they appear. For example, the treble clef spaces spell the word face, so we know that if an F is on a space, A will be the next space, C is the space after that, and then E will be the final one. Likewise, the treble clef lines spell every good boy deserves fudge, E, G, B, D, F. So if E is on a line, G will be the next line, and so on and so forth. However, these don't have to appear in those exact spots. Sometimes an F can appear on a line, and so if an F is on a line, the next line will also be an A. The line after that is a C, and then the line after that will be E. And vice versa, E can also appear on a space. So if E is on a space, then G will be the next space, B, D, and F. If you notice these appearing interchangeably, you'll have much better time figuring out all the notes as you play. To conclude this video, I will demonstrate the practice piece listed at the end of the chapter. Remember to use your mnemonics and your storytelling to help you find the notes along the way. And don't worry about what fingers to play yet, because we'll discuss fingering in the next video. I highly recommend you don't go full speed yet, but instead take this piece slow and work your way up to it. It's always a good idea to be slow and accurate rather than fast and miss a lot of the notes. So without further ado, let's go ahead. So let's recap everything we've learned thus far. The piano has 88 keys in total, made of white keys and alternating groups of 2 and 3 black keys, with each repetition of black keys being called an octave. The white keys use the musical alphabet, which is just the first 7 letters of the English alphabet, A through G, and the most important note on the piano being middle C, which divides the left and right hand. The black keys, on the other hand, are modifications of the white keys, called sharps and flats. The sharp is when you take a white key and move to the very next key to the right, and a flat is when you take a white key and move to the very next key to the left. Musical notes are written on a staff, which is a group of 5 lines separated by 4 spaces. The treble clef is the symbol for the right hand, and the bass clef is the symbol for the left hand notes, and put together they form the grand staff, with the treble clef being above the bass clef and both clefs being joined by a bracket. On the grand staff, there are 7 markers for musical success, which are key notes we use to find the locations of other notes around them. The first is middle C, which is on its own line between the treble and bass clef. The next 2 markers are both C's as well, located 2 lines above the treble clef and 2 lines below the bass clef. After that, we have 2 G's. One is located at the bottom swirl of the treble clef on the second line, and one is located at the top swirl of the treble clef above all 5 lines on the next space. The last 2 markers use the design of the bass clef. The first is an F located between the 2 dots on the second highest line, and the next is an A located at the bottom of the swirl of the bass clef itself on the very bottom space. Besides the 7 markers for musical success, we also use mnemonics to find some of the notes along the way. The treble clef lines spell "every good boy deserves fudge," E-G, B, D, F. The treble clef spaces spell face, F-A-C-E. The bass clef lines spell "green birds don't fly away," G, B, D, F, A. And the bass clef spaces spell "all cows eat grass," A-C-E-G. These mnemonics will always appear in this order, regardless of whether they begin on a line or a space. For example, the treble clef face may not begin on a space altogether. It may begin on a line, but will follow the lines F-A-C-E instead. Make sure to put all these ideas into practice before we move on to Chapter 2, and I'll see you in the next video.